Hello, Rabbi. Oh, Rabbi, you're on mute right now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay. Am I supposed to mute out, or are you muting out other the people in the class, or how is that working?
So it looks like everyone who's supposed to be muted is muted right now, but if anyone, makes a mistake and unmutes themselves, either me or Luke, who's I don't know where he is on your screen, but he's to the left of me. Luke Haberman, he's my boyfriend. He's helping out on this call too. So if anyone needs any help, technical help, just feel free to private message us in the chat. Or Rabbi, of course, if you need anything, just give us a holler.
Okay, so is there or should there be a chance for people to ask questions along the line?
Do you want people to ask questions at the end or in the middle? We can certainly help you out with that.
I can't hear you now. Are you?
Oh, can you hear me better now? Can you hear me, Luke? I can hear you. Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Rabbi, we can hear you. Can you hear us? That's a no. Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yes. Let's go.
Can you hear? Can anybody in class hear me?
Yes.
we can hear you,
Yes.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Okay. Okay. Good Tavach, Shavua Tov. Good week, Bon Sen. And we're starting a week, starting it together. And not only is it the beginning of a week, but it's a special time of week called Motzoi Shabbat, the ending of the Exodus of Shabbos. And it's a combination of still feeling presence that we've had for 24 plus hours of Shabbos. On the other hand, it's now time to bid it farewell. And it's appropriate time to discuss about the Hasidic movement, because in our traditions that it bridges the gap between Kodesh and Hol, the holy and the secular, between this world and the next world. In fact, the traditional Saturday night meal called a malava muka, sitting off the Queen Sabbath, gives nurture, sustains, gives, enriches a part of our body called the loose bone that says never decays as the source for the eventual chiyat hametim of the resurrection. So, and also connected with Elijah, the prophet, Eliyahu Navi, who's going to announce the arrival of Mashiach. It's a Hasidic tradition that telling a story, a Hasidic story on Saturday night, brings added luck for one's sustenance, for geld, for making a living. When it's with Baal Shem Tov, him starring in episode, founder of the Hasidic movement. However, it says there are a few disclaimers that not only a Baal Shem story, but any type of Hasidic story, and it helps not only for Pasa, for making a living, but for all needs of a person whenever one tells it. So I want to share a short story. A homeowner had a flock of chickens in the shtetl, in the Eastern Europe villages, and he would send one of his servants, one of his helpers, to take a live chicken to the shochet, to the kosher slaughterer, and then he'd bring back. He evidently wasn't all that far away. So one day he gives him a live chicken to take slaughter. Sometime later, he comes back and with the chicken, however, being alive. So the homeowner of the household, the Baal Bayit, is surprised. What happened this time that you sent it? This was a very kind of a simple kind of person, did odds and ends chores around the house, not particularly learned in any area. So he told him like this. He said, regularly, when I take chicken, the ritual slaughter is the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. And one of the steps involved in kosher slaughtering is from time to time, the knife, besides being sharp, needs to be cleaned off. And they typically have a pail of water where the knife would be dipped a few times and then wiped dry for future use. So he said the Baal Shem Tov wasn't there this time. It was a substitute shochet, substitute slaughter. And he said when Baal Shem Tov would slaughter, he'd clean the knife with his tears. He was, while fulfilling the mitzvah, kosher slaughtering, he nevertheless affected him through and through that he was killing an animal. That's how Baal Shem Tov would do it. So I think that's the way to do it. This other person, his substitute, used a bucket of water. So he said, I don't know if this would have met your standards. So that's a small glimpse of the sensitivity of Baal Shem Tov. Another episode involving the Baal Shem Tov, that in his early years, he was a sort of a, today maybe you'd call him a teacher's helper. And he would bring kids to school, the Hebrew school. And there's a Sikh saying that goes that we wish we would kiss the Sefer Torah with as much affection and love and sincerity as Baal Shem Tov did his precious flock of children that he would bring to school. This is all of way of introduction of the time and the place and the setting. And so I'm Rabbi Blotner, and we're going to spend the next approximately 40 minutes with some goals. My kids on the vacation, I will tell them to brief the class what they're going to run into. Make sure they know what it's about, and you stick to it and they'll hold you to it. So I'm going to take a look at what Kabbalah is and what Kabbalah isn't. and for lack of a better term, we'll deal with, quote, kosher Kabbalah, not, I don't know what Madonna or others are doing. We're going to take a look at conditions in East Europe during the 18th century, as rather the late 17th century, prior to the rise and the spread of the Hasidic movement, to see in what setting this is taking place. We're going to take a look at some leading Hasidic figures of past and of present, and what are some ways that distinguish the Hasidic movement. So 1600s in Europe ended up being a very challenging time. There were pogroms, or almost spontaneous uprisings of local population against Jews, and I emphasize local, because from city to city and shtetl to shtetl, the Jews could faring well depending on the lord, the baron, the czar, whoever was in charge of that area, the prince, and in nearby areas things might have been the opposite. The year 1648 serves as a landmark, infamous year. There was the decree known in classical Jewish writings, Tach V'Tat. Tach V'Tat is the Jewish year, short in 1640 and 1649, when Bogdan Khmelnytsky and his band of Cossack murderers took a heavy toll on many Jewish communities throughout a wide area of Poland. Poland, Russia, the borders were changing quite constantly, but the result was death and destruction and economic chaos for the Jewish people. Another preceding event that colored the climate was that of Shabbatai Tzvi. Perhaps some of you have heard about him. He was a false Messiah. He's somebody that claimed to be Mashiach, claimed to be the messianic personality that the Bible, and through the sages and the Talmud and Maimonides in his codes, rule will come to redeem the Jewish people. However, he was a entrepreneurial figure that misled many people. Perhaps he had the gift of gab, or the climate was, and people were so desperate that they sought any way out of their despair. But he failed, needless to say, because he was fraudulent from the get-go. And this, it spawned a few other mini messianic movements that again misled many people, that were to give cause to be suspicious of some movements that appeared new and unjustified, and initially seeming placed the emphasis on areas where people weren't accustomed to. Putting this in, want to, as mentioned a little while ago, discuss Kabbalah and discuss, usually we sum up Kabbalah as Jewish mysticism. So mysticism is one of those words that seems to me can be misleading. There's a lot of religious words in the English language that don't do justice to traditional Jewish attitudes of that topic. One of the reasons is it's good to remember that serious Jewish writings, original essays in depth, philosophical translation, commentaries are maybe only in English language, has taken place maybe only in the last 70, 80 years. Prior to that, the main centers of Jew and especially of higher Jewish learning and research were not in English-speaking countries. So there's Jewish law, Jewish theology has many terms in its original language that isn't so much can't translate the word, it's tricky how to apply. So regarding mysticism, I put in this category, people come up to me, whether it's Jew, non-Jew, and say, oh, Rabbi, we don't believe in angels, do we? Isn't that from the church? Or we don't believe in the devil, we don't believe in this, we don't believe in that. So I tell them their major topics can't be answered right away, and it depends what you mean by that. So to them, we use the term, does somebody say, does Judaism believe in mysticism? And sometimes Hasidic figures are referred to as being mystics. So again, you can look up the dictionary, see what mystical means. Not perfect, does it just. But as far as Kabbalah goes, first of all, there's a misunderstanding. The Kabbalah is not a book. Nobody wrote a Kabbalah because it's not a book entitled Kabbalah. There are various readings, teachings, and tradition that collectively are called work Sifrei Kabbalah. The first one that later Kabbalistic teachers are based on is that of the Zohar, Z-O-A-R. I think a lot of folks have heard of it. That was written by the Talmudic scholar Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Some of it is in Aramaic, some of it is in Hebrew, and it's a expounding on the Torah with insight and deeper meanings that we readily find in the verses and in the commentaries. Later on, a primary school which developed into what is now called Kabbalistic teachings evolved in the city of Safad, or in Ivrit, Safat. The luminary, the leading figure of Kabbalah was Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, or known as the Ari. He and his colleagues and his students, particularly Rabbi Moshe Cordova, taught and explained inner meanings of the Torah. What's a mitzvah? What can we know more about God? Can we know anything about God? Should we try to pursue this? And these teachings were, for many years, kept, if you will, under wrap, and it was in the realm of only particularly scholarly people. In fact, I think 40 has been as the age before one should delve into purely Kabbalistic teachings. However, the Hasidic movement, maybe one could say, is applied Kabbalistic teachings, is taking these things, sort of not stripping of them, but explaining them in more lengthy understandable terms to get an idea of what exactly is a mitzvah. And it reminds me of something that happened several years ago when I met somebody. I was saying prayers for people visiting the cemetery before the high holidays, and a young man came up and said, "You know, Rabbi, I'm not like totally religious, but I put on the tefillin. I like that ritual." So I said, "That's beautiful, but let me maybe redefine it or add some meaning that tefillin isn't just a ritual, it's a connection." In fact, Hasidic teachings explain that the word mitzvah is a cousin to the Aramaic word tzavta v'tzavta, which means bonding, linking. In English, there's a word, maybe not so popular, enjoin, enjoin, which means to instruct, give an order, to command. And notice it's from the word join, to link, because when there's an instruction, that provides a relationship between the commander and the command. If the commander didn't care, if you will, about this person, they wouldn't tell them anything to do. There has to be a link. So in the area of mitzvahs, and like we say before, we all know, we say Asher Keshanu Mitzvasav, that God made us holy by his commandments, meaning that every time we do a commandment, we're fulfilling God's will and being connected. That's just one example of how the Hasidic teachings infuse a physical act and clearly take it out of the realm of a ritual. Not that ritual is such a horrible word, but sometimes can be very limiting for us. You know, within the hour, give or take, we made Havdalah tonight. We make Havdalah every Motzei Shabbos, every Saturday night. And there's 3 elements in Havdalah, and I'd like to link them with 3 elements of the Hasidic movement and teachings. So in Havdalah, we have wine, we have spices, and we have the candle. Wine, the Talmud teaches us, Ein Simcha Ela B'Yayin, that wine evokes joy. Also, wine brings out what's hidden within us. That the Talmud says you can tell a person, and in Hebrew there's alliteration, bikoso, bikiso, ubikaso. You can tell a person by a temper. When somebody loses their temper, they say things to, unfortunately for them, that they might not have otherwise said. Oh, you felt that way. And so it reveals our inner feelings when we lose our temper. Another example is the kisso, our pocket, how we spend our money. And I'm talking of people who might, especially with the pandemic, might be struggling to make a living, but people that are blessed with an abundance of money. So you can see what they're like, whether they spend their money on clothing, whether they spend it on art, whether they're traveling, whether they have a hobby. So you get to see what they're out. And last but not least, because by their cup, that when they overdrink, that people say things also that they wouldn't otherwise say. The Talmud says, Nichnas yayin v'yotza sod. Wine is Jewish recycling or drinking recycling. Wine comes in, secrets come out. In fact, for those that like gematria, I'm sure maybe amongst the listeners, there's some gematria lovers, numerical value. So the numerical value of wine is 70, yayin. The numerical value of sod is also 70. Samach, 60, vav, dalet is 70 and 70. So one comes in, secrets come out. And wine ain't simcha l'bayin, that wine generates joy. And joy is certainly one of the key elements that the Hasidic movement stresses. And again, shouldn't come as a shock. David Hamel, King David said in Psalm 100, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, serve the Almighty with joy. So rather than being a radical innovation, it was emphasizing features that, because of the depression engendered by the climate, by the times, by the economy, by persecutions, by such discouraging episodes with Appetite Tzvi, that Jews were down and out. There's a Hasidic saying that being happy isn't a legal commandment, and being sad or depressed isn't a legal sin. But how detrimental depression can be for a person if they sort of make themselves miserable. I'm not talking if, God forbid, somebody has a clinical psychiatric condition. It can drag them way down. And on the other hand, being positive, being optimistic, being happy, that can propel a person to do things in a positive way that they never would. The Talmud tells us, Simcha porei geder, that Simcha breaks through normal propriety and so-called manners. I like to use the example, if you watch a quiz show and there's the winner, so the winner, who might otherwise be very reserved, goes crazy on the stage if they win a lot of money. That's what Simcha can do. That's connected with the wine of Havdalah. It's a major theme in the Hasidic movement. Then we have spices that the Psalmim revive. Why have spices on Saturday night? What's the connection? So the main line of thought is that when Shabbos leaves, we lose our added spiritual identity. We get during the Sabbath an added soul, called in Hebrew Neshama Teira, and that leaves. So we're handicapped a bit. We're saddened at that prospect, and we can be very well concerned about now we have to get back into the hustle, bustle of things. And spices revive our spirits. And the Hasidic movement helped revive the spirits of countless segments of Jewish society at this time. Last but not least, in Havdalah comparison, we have the candle, fire. So the Torah itself is compared in a variety of settings to fire as being something that warms us, that gives us life, that's spiritual. Fire is something that's spiritual, even though we can see it, but we can't touch it. And fire is compared to the soul itself. Ner Hashem Shmat Adam, that the candle of the Almighty is a person's soul. In Hasidic teachings, they love very much to use the term or, light. We have the term or Ein Sof, the light, the endless light emanating from the Almighty. That there too, the existence of light is very apparent, and light cheers us up. Light is symbolic with life. We know with turning back clocks and everything, there's seasonal SDD, seasonal darkness, depression, and Hasidic teachings brought this light to so many people. The founder of the Hasidic movement, the Baal Shem Tov, so he lived from 698 till 1698 till about 1768. He was going incognito for some time, getting a sense of mood of the masses, and he would do such would seem elementary, simple steps as asking people, how are you? And he'd wait for them to say, Baruch Hashem, or they might have said in Yiddish, Dank God. Thank God, I'm, getting by. And with this, he was awakening in them not only their sense of appreciation, but their sense of recognition of the Almighty. He developed students, followers in both a formal, informal sense, and sent them on a wide variety of missions, sometimes involving a very specific trip and a very specific person who needed some help. Other times would be on a more communal level to see what was their needs and what was on their minds and what was troubling them. So he could be called, maybe in contemporary terms, a kind of itinerant social worker, being in touch with the masses. His teachings and his emphasis on joy and was misinterpreted as laying down the importance of Torah study. Many descriptions of the time and link it where the Hasid movement tried to alleviate some of the situation was the gap between the learned and the unlearned. And those who possess learning, sometimes, pardon pun, you might say it went to their head. That could be good, that's where it belongs, in their head. But it would often be insensitive to the needs of those who didn't have the opportunity to learn. And, we often, sometimes, we know of, could be our parents or grandparents that during the Depression in the 20s, the 30s, had to drop out of school to, school dropouts to help the family, etc. Here you had many people who basically didn't have any schooling to begin with. There was nothing to drop out from. But their sincerity and their inherent belief that they had and that was instilled from generation to generation, despite the poverty, despite the persecution, and despite the isolation and then people being on the countryside, being in hamlets, where there were very few people, let alone very few Jews and very few leaders. Nevertheless, Jewish traditions and value was carried on. And at times, this gap, and when they would come for business or simcha to the big city, and noting in some circumstances the elitist position of the scholars, made them feel taka, in fact, second class. And the Baal Shem Tov emphasized that their sincere belief, without the benefit of it being reinforced by in-depth Torah study, puts them equal, if not in first place. The Baal Shem Tov, when he passed away, laid a pretty good groundwork in his area. When I say his area, I was a little bit more ambitious, organized, maybe have some maps, but we're talking about Eastern Europe as opposed to Central Europe or Western Europe. And within Eastern Europe itself, more, and again, with all kinds of changing boundaries due to the many conflicts, areas that today probably belong to Eastern Poland and Western Ukraine, where the Hasidic movement was first being spread. When he passed away, the leadership with his instructions went to someone by the name of Dov Ber, who lived in Mezrich. Mezrich was a small community. And for a variety of reasons, Dov Ber didn't travel around. He had some physical ailments that hampered his mobility, but it's hard to just say that, that was the main reason. But there was also, he was meant to be a locale that would draw people, where students would spend time to be nurtured with his teaching and then be sent out to various areas. So we find he had many disciples, 10 leading disciples, if you were, in his inner sanctum, and they were assigned different parts of Europe. Excuse me, when I say different parts, not whole country, and in our terms of ready transportation, it would seem almost like some people might commute further to work than was their area, spreading into parts of Russia, going south into Hungary and Romania, go north towards White Russia, excuse me, Lithuania. So, and not only geographically, but in style and personality, that some of the students had different, we'll call it specialties, were more gifted in certain areas, or were drawn to a more intellectual type of crowd, others into other areas. A leading student of his was Rabbi Schneur Zalman, who came from Liadi. Rabbi Schneur Zalman ended up being the founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement. He dealt with an area where the Talmudic learning in Lithuania and neighboring White Russia was quite strong. And so he wasn't just a song and dance mystic, but a deep intellect, providing many Hasidic teachings, which are based on Chabad. His main work, the Bible of Chabad Hasidic teachings, is the Tanya.
I don't mean to
And the
interrupt you.
name Chabad stands for Chochmah and Das, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. That in order to have feelings about the Almighty to their peak, that one needs to have some knowledge. I like to use the example in some of the classes I teach that if you a lot of us are or have been, I'm sure, in sales, whether you sold newspapers or cars, you have to get the customer to want the item, if you will, to be in love with the item. And they have to know about it. If you're a comedian, if they don't understand the punchline, they're not going to laugh. So in order to help increase love of the Almighty, he urged his followers to study, to contemplate, and he wrote a wide variety of writings that were expanded upon in subsequent generations of Hasidic teachings to know some workings of God. And as King Solomon said, Mibsari echzeloka, from my very flesh, from how my body and soul interact, we can get an idea what God, some inklings of what God is about.
Rabbi, we don't mean to
All
interrupt you.
these
Just want to make sure you have your 10 minutes remaining.
scholars, all the teachers were people that this engendered a lot of opposition. We found that the leading Lithuanian Gaon, super scholar, the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Elijah, through reports that he got from his students, ended up opposing the Hasidic movement. And interestingly, those people that were in opposition, in fact, called themselves mitnagdim. Mitnagdim means to place one's to be in the opposition. So it's interesting that while they sort of saw themselves as the establishment, they ended up calling themselves the opposition. And the movement that they felt was detrimental, they ended up calling Hasidim or the pious ones. Hasidic teachings eventually, and the personalities eventually prove themselves. We say in the Talmud, Ein chacham kibal nisayon. There's no one as wise like somebody who's been there. You know, if you have buy a new computer or any kind of new high-tech gadget, you want to know if it works, what the catalog says about it, the sales in a nice box, wrapper, etc. That doesn't fly unless it's going to work. So the Hasidic movement has proven itself that they're synonymous with reviving Jews, giving them a geschmack, having them relish, enjoy their Jewish identity, being more conscientious about the Almighty, being conscientious about their obligations, the privileges of being a Jew, and a good chunk of Eastern Europe in the 1800s was won over to the Hasidic movement, and till this day, throughout the world, starting in Worcester, including Worcester and elsewhere, that there are families practicing the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and of the Hasidic masters. I don't know if technically how we can work this, about if people want to ask some questions, if that is feasible. I'm gonna try to.
Hey, Rabbi Blotner, can you hear us?
He can't. He just.
Okay, great. Does anyone have a question who would like to unmute?
Just so everyone knows, we only have a few more minutes in here. The room is going to end at 7:50.
Well, I'll actually just ask then, Rabbi Blotner. I know a lot of times that Hasidism is kind of thought of in connection with Orthodoxy, and I'm wondering how you would say Hasidim has kind of influenced Jewish culture across denominations.
Wait a minute, you're.
Oh, you can't hear?
No.
Okay, could you repeat that?
No problem. I was just gonna say, I know a lot of times people kind of just attribute Hasidism specifically, in connection with Orthodoxy. So I'm wondering how Hasidism has influenced Jewish culture across denominations. You're on mute, Rabbi Blotner? Well, I'm not sure who's able to hear who, but this session of Torathon is going to be ending in 2 minutes. So I think now is probably just a good time to conclude and say thank you, Rabbi Blotner, for your words of wisdom, and thank you for everyone who attended. It was great to see all your faces, and even good to see everyone whose names we can see on the screen. Glad to have you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Torathon.
Thank you very much. This was really great.
All right, so I think at everyone's convenience, we should go ahead and head back to the main lobby because the breakout rooms are going to close in 50 seconds. It's telling me.
Board and doing your
Oh.
thing.
Great.
I spend my life on the computer. I've got a setup here with several monitors going. I actually could have 4 monitors going right now at the same time.